sorry everyone for the slight delay. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. First want to acknowledge that we are here in Toronto gathered on the traditional territory of the Wendat, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee and Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Also want to note that it is Indigenous History Month, and an opportunity for us to learn about cultures, traditions and experiences of Indigenous peoples, including where we are here in Toronto as well. We're marking the beginning of Pride season. It's a busy season. Pride season among others, but also celebrating Filipino Heritage Month. I'm also here today, most importantly, to provide updates and announce the future of the caregiving program. I just spent some time with really passionate advocates and it justly went over. I was late, but I wanted to be able to hear them out about a program that I think Lanny said was 20 years in the making. Caregivers have a long legacy here in Canada as they're instrumental in helping families take care of loved ones. They help us raise our kids and we as parents, so that we as parents can go to work. When we struggle to find necessary care for our seniors, they're here to support us. With the aging demographics in this country, this is something that is an increasing reality, not a decreasing one. Certainly not lost on me that the majority of caregivers that come to Canada tend to be women who are leaving their homes, often leaving their own children to take care of our children. I can assure you that these sacrifices are not going unnoticed as my department works to improve the caregiver program. If there's anything from the discussion, the passionate discussion today, is that there is more work to be done. Thousands of caregivers have come to Canada, started new lives and built new communities. However, the reality is that despite their hard work, they've faced and continue to face barriers in obtaining their permanent residency status. Earlier today, I met, or just a few minutes ago, we concluded a meeting with current and past caregivers who told me their journeys and challenges to Canada. Teresa, who's there among us today, told us her story about how she works during the day to take care of kids for a family in Toronto, but at night has to take courses to pass the very onerous language requirements and the ones that are even more onerous in similarly situated circumstances. Ce sont des héros méconnus de notre communauté, méritent une voie d'accès à la résidence permanente qui soit juste, humaine et à la fois compatissante. In June 2014, the Live-In Caregiver program had an inventory of about 60,000 people. Today, we've processed over 99% of those. And I'm pleased to share that we virtually eliminated the backlog of the legacy Live-In Caregiver program. While we diligently phased out the program that no longer served their purpose, we created pathways to pave the way for caregivers to ensure their continuity. The home support worker and home child care provider pilots are specific examples of this. Launched in 2019, these pilots have attracted significant interest. In 2023 alone, Canada admitted over 3,000 caregivers and their family members to help provide care to seniors, children, and provide support in the home. In 2024, so this year, almost 2,000 more caregivers and their families became permanent residents. While these pilots have attracted many qualified individuals and their families in Canada and help provide in-home care, the need for caregivers, as I mentioned earlier, continues. As is the case with many programs, we've engaged directly with stakeholders and caregivers and identified ways to significantly shift the program to better suit the needs of Canadian families and employers and to improve the program's support for newcomers. Today, I'm very pleased to announce that we are launching new pilots that will provide permanent residency status for caregivers as soon as they arrive in Canada. The biggest change coming in these new pilots will be providing a one-step immigration process. Before, caregivers first needed to get work permits and then obtain work experience before applying for permanent residency. Under the new rules, we're simplifying the process and providing them with a clear, straightforward pathway to stay and care for our loved ones. The change will notably provide more autonomy for caregivers to leave workplaces with abusive situations and seek opportunities to advance in the care sector. And Lord knows I've heard a lot of those stories, not only today, but in the past, as we've been listening and reaching out to people that have been providing that support and have been in abusive situations. I'm also pleased to share that we are lowering, out of fairness, the language requirements to Canada Language Benchmark 4 under these new PR on arrival pilots. Our aim is to strike a balance between breaking down the barriers caregivers face to get PR and selecting newcomers who will be resilient to changes in the labor market. Lowering the language requirements is a must-needed change that we've heard directly from the community on, and will align with other programs in my department, as well as provincial programs, creating better consistency and fairness for all applicants. Caregivers will still have the needed language skills to work in the caregiving field. Let me be clear about that. And finally, as we look to address the desperate need for caregivers, we're also expanding the pilot programs from private household employers now to also include organizations who will directly employ home care workers. This will allow for and not-for-profit organizations to provide job offers and help address home care needs where labor shortages exist. Nous savons qu'il existe une demande de soins à domicile dans tout le pays et que de nombreux Canadiens recherchent la flexibilité d'engager des fournisseurs de soins par l'intermédiaire d'organisations qui embauchent et déploient des travailleurs à domicile auprès de divers clients. But let me be clear, we're not including placement agencies. La stabilité est importante pour tous nos programmes, y compris pour les aides-soignants. C'est pourquoi nous continuerons à traiter les demandes existantes et nous visons à faire évoluer nos prochains projets pilotes vers un programme permanent. Je communiquerai de plus amples détails ultérieurement. For decades, generations of foreign domestic workers and caregivers have fought hard for this recognition. I believe these changes will provide families with the services they need and continue to advance protections for home care workers. This is something that's long overdue, and this is one of our ways to tell home care workers that we see you and we've heard you. It's time that we create programs that work for caregivers and not leave them behind and meet the need of our communities. Thank you, merci, and I'm glad to take your questions at this point.
It's just me.
Thank you for waiting, first of all, for this. Okay.
I just want to start off by clarifying exactly when this pilot starts and how quickly you might be able to process these applications, just given the ongoing backlogs at IRCC.
Yeah, so I guess last question first. That's a work in progress. We still do have a backlog under the pilots. There's an issue of fairness in there, and the caregivers and advocacy folks for caregivers today were pointing out that there will have to be a look at some of the rules currently in place, particularly the language rules that are butting people up against the wall of permanent residency because they can't pass their level language 5. So there's a fairness aspect that my team needs to attack in the next step of this process. The pilot, we are looking at launching it as early as this fall, as late, and we'll be pushing for this as early in 2025. And then for the backlog, there is a constant discussion every year about our levels plan. Clearly, Canada needs more caregivers. Clearly, those people need their rights protected, so it'll be an ongoing discussion, but it's one that, given the backlog, we'll want to be able to look at those numbers and process them over the next few years, including the first cohort of people that will be entitled to PR. Obviously, there are people here today that have been fighting for the same thing, that are looking to get that 12-month experience. And so within that cohort, looking at some elements of fairness. As a principle, it's not only the right message to send, it's the right policy to roll out today. But again, making sure that the logistics work and the timing works is also a consideration, principally out of fairness for all the people that have applied and are looking to come to Canada.
Okay, so that applies to the fact that some of these programs are going to be expiring this month, right? And if this pilot doesn't launch until the fall.
We have enough, and this is where backlog sadly plays in our advantage, is we have enough folks to fill the spots that are there. Those programs are no longer taking applications because they're well oversubscribed, but they do formally terminate in mid-June, both of those pilot programs, with the new one to launch later. It will not affect the flow of people coming to the country, but I think there was a lot of trepidation as to whether the Government of Canada was considering doing something else, and I think here today we're reassuring them we are doing something else, something actually much more positive.
Just want to confirm, is this my third question? This is my
You can. You're the only one. You can have probably 3 or 4 more. If
I'm
you
going to
want.
keep going then. Okay. I want to, just given that there's an audience here who you just spoke with, saying they're, yes, this is a great measure, but there's still work that needs to be done. What did you hear from them? What are they saying?
Would you want to hear from them? Because they're much more for.
Well, let's see how you
I wouldn't.
Let's see how you interpreted this meeting.
So this meeting was, I think, productive. Everyone is happy about the announcement today. We focused on 2 or 3 other elements that are really touch the community in particular. The broad program on regularization that our government is working on. I have said recently, but it's no secret to anyone that there are challenges in and around gaining that consensus in government as to whether a broad regularization program is the right thing to do at this point. Doesn't change the mandate letter that was issued to the minister at the time from the Prime Minister that we have to look at pathways towards regularization of people that have been here in Canada for a long time and deserve to be Canadian. And so that's sort of something that is still very much in the mix. They were here to advocate very much for the regularization of people that have been in the home caregiving space and have, for whether it is abuse, exploitation, falling out of status, inability to necessarily meet some of the strict permanent residency parameters that we put into place, been here, have kids, are Canadians by any other name, but cannot get that paperwork. It doesn't change that resolve, but what that looks like right now is still quite uncertain. So they're here advocating and pushing me, as they should, on those elements. And then consistency in what you mentioned in your question, which is how we make the current programs, which have, my department loves pilot projects, how it makes it more consistent with what the announcement is today, which is a very good, as one of the people around the table said, it's been 20 years in the making. People have been pushing for it and highlighting a lot of the difficult positions people are put in with not having a direct permanent residency stream, and finally seeing the light of day. So that is a positive thing. And then the next steps in and around, again, that making sure we clear the backlog, making sure there are more resources for people that are in those vulnerable positions as caregivers. A lot of talk about people's families and being the psychological and mental health impact that this has had on people's families. It's no secret to anyone that we are talking often about women, more often than not from the Philippines, that have seen their family situation severely impacted, if not devastated, by a program that, while it's very popular in Canada, has had effects on their lives, their lived experience, in fact, their impression of Canada once they become PR or citizens.
I'll shift gears a little bit, and I'll go back to it, I promise. We're hearing from Palestinian families, those working to help Palestinians resettle here in Canada, saying, yes, it's great now that there's programs that allow them to apply for worker permits and therefore access health insurance, but kind of the same issue, right? That the applications are taking far too long. What is your message to them? How are you addressing those delays?
Well, we rushed to get this program out at the end of December, launched in early January. The assumption was that it would have cooperation with the folks that actually control the border, which is not Canada, the Israeli Minister of Defense or the Egyptian government. It is not a program that is one that has had the level of success that we all would have hoped. We all would have hoped that there would have been a ceasefire and a release of hostages by now. That isn't the case. And so there are things that Canada controls, there are things that Canada does not control. It doesn't change the fact that I or Minister Joly or anyone in our cabinet keep pushing not only for a ceasefire, the release of hostages, but also a process to get the vulnerable out if they can. Some people have taken matters into their own hand and had to pay exorbitant bribes to groups to get them to Cairo. Once they're safe, we have adapted the program not only to expand it, like I announced officially about a week ago, but to be more flexible in bringing people to Canada. We've issued about 500 visas in various categories, but we're looking to bring 5,000 in as well. There are, I think it's no secret to anyone that when you list Hamas, that is a terrorist group, as a terrorist group, that impacts the screening process and the time associated to that. And that's something that we have to continue to work on as we make sure that those people that are able to get to a safe place, notably Cairo, can go through the biometrics process, the security screening, and then on to Canada if they so choose once the visa is issued. Again, we are pushing as hard as we can to get people out. We have had some success on the consular level, getting our own Canadians and permanent residents out. But now is the next step of working to help getting people that have a connection to Canada that aren't Canadian or aren't permanent residents properly screened, and then on to Canada where they can come here and get supports and a work permit. This is a unique program compared to our international partners. We have talked to a number of our partners, other countries, about the programs they would contemplate, and they're looking to mirror that. But it is very unique, and I think that's one that, despite the fact that it has not been the success we had wanted it to be, is one that we can be quite proud of. But no one should really be celebrating any sort of success until people are safe and that we have people in Canada while we continue to look for a ceasefire and the release of hostages.
I think the concern for these folks is that, once they actually do make it here, they're having a really hard time accessing these resources, right? They're saying that it's taking so long to get these families the work permits that they need to get the access to health insurance, right? So what are you aware of these kinds of delays when it comes to Palestinian refugees already in Canada, and what are you doing to address those delays?
So our teams keep working and getting those supports rolled out. People are entitled to work permits. They're entitled to federal interim health for a 3-month period on landing. There have been relatively few people that have gotten here, so we would probably work directly with those groups and making sure that if there are problems in the system, that we get them ironed out quickly, because they should not have that problem on landing.
I have a question. Last year you made an announcement about the startup visa program. People under that category getting an open work permit for 3 years. I just want to check. Has there been any progress in implementing it?
On the startup visa program?
The work permit was supposed to. They now get closed work permit. You mentioned
So which program are you talking about?
Startup visa program.
So the entrepreneur startup visa program?
The ones who land here.
Yes.
They come and close work permit. There was talks about converting that into open work permit for 3 years so that they could work while they work on the startup plan. So I just wanted to understand, has there been any progress on it?
We're working on some of the reforms. We've made some recent ones to the startup program, made some reforms. It is not an area that is without challenges, but always willing to make more if necessary. Our teams can get you a little more detail on the current state of play if you want.
Keep going. I'll keep going until you tell me to stop going. One more. Okay. What would you say to maybe, I don't know if this is what you heard in this meeting recently, but what would you say to some who might be concerned that even the adjustments to the requirements for caregivers might still be a little too prohibitive? Is there any sort of flexibility there?
Well, I think getting PR on landing in Canada gives people the flexibility they've been fighting for decades. Clearly, there have been challenges in this program that these people have been focusing on and fighting for a long time. So I think it's positive. But again, you can make these announcements, but making sure that they land and get out properly is often the subsequent challenge. We'll be focused on making sure we get this right. If there are adjustments to be made, we're willing to make them. This is a pathway for people that want to come to Canada, serve an area that is very important for the population here, and we owe it to ourselves to serve them right once they get here. So hearing them out, it will be, is always something that is very, very important to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.